this Wasatch Choice 2050 is an impressive plan by my judgment. I want to hear you comment on two things. How does it compare to what you've seen in other areas? And then, sorry to double up on you, but Andrew mentioned these key strategies, and the fourth one was this link between development and transportation decisions. And I'd love to hear your comments on why that's so important.
Okay, well, the first question was, how does this stack up with some efforts around the country? And it's the double-edged sword of growth, that when you have a vision or a plan that goes out as far as this one does, and you're experiencing so much growth, you have an opportunity, you have a big ability to create the place that you want. And so
as opposed to being in decline.
Right, there are places that are in decline, or they're growing very, very slowly. Maybe they don't have, for example, Andrew talked about change in communities that already exist. I encourage you to do this. Think about the street in your city that you don't like the most, okay? The one street that you wish you could change, right? Well, growth is our ability to remake some of those places. And that's really, if you sum it up, the Wasatch Choice vision, we have that ability to say, okay, growth is a challenge, but it's an opportunity, and how can we make the most of it? And I think, when we look at the numbers at an organization like Wasatch Front Regional Council, and we project them out into the future, and we see the kinds of benefits that Andrew talked about, we have to pinch ourselves, but it goes away really fast, because at the end of the day, that only happens by all of the collective decisions of people like you going back and saying, is that the direction that we want? Yes or no, or more likely, some nuanced difference. There will be some change as you think about how things work out in your community, but you really hold the baton. So that future only happens through our actions together.
Yeah. The link between
Yes.
transportation choices and development. Why
Well,
is that so critical?
If you think about the communities that we're all facing a huge challenge of the changing face of development itself. So we're seeing a lot more multifamily development, more townhouses. We are all seeing that, and
Fewer strip malls.
Fewer strip malls, yeah,
Over
that's
retailed
right.
in some areas.
Market demands are changing in a lot of ways. Less demand for retail, changing face of the housing mix. And so that's happening a lot in our communities. The link between transportation and development is the key question of, where are you going to put those things? Where will you put the multifamily? Will you create a walkable development? Will you create those opportunities near public transportation, or where households can walk to the kinds of things that Eva's talked about, where she could walk to, in her case, a university? This question of where we put these sometimes difficult, but certainly changing things that we're experiencing in our communities, that's the key. We can unlock the ability for people to walk, bike, travel short distances, have access to a great number of opportunities based on how we think about where things align development and infrastructure.
Great. So the theme of this event is access to opportunity. Abby, I want to start with you to just help explain to this audience, what do you think of this concept? How do you define access to opportunity? Why is that so important? Why are people talking more and more about access to opportunity?
Well, I need to start off by apologizing. I have lost my voice. So
It's been
bear
happening
with
to
me.
a lot of people.
I will be
so
quick.
Don't worry about it.
And it's my birthday of all things, which is horrible, right? I think it's just the time of year. But in any event, Natalie, thanks for the question. We didn't hear about this topic until probably recently, when Andrew and Ted and the mayor actually came out and said this is something that's really important, to have job centers that are close to housing developments. So as Ted alluded to, you can actually walk and bike. You don't have to get in a car and travel long distances. And it's really key that we look at these development patterns because we are now in the Wasatch Front 190-mile metro. We're no longer, as Natalie showed in her pictures, Draper and then Sandy. We're one continuous city, so to speak, with invisible borders. And we have to work together. I mean, the collaboration is absolutely key, but I just want to say that this growth is, what a great problem to have.
Yeah.
I mean, what an opportunity that people want to be here. They want to live here. They want to work here. They want to raise their families here. And that's a testament to all of you in the audience that we've created this place that people want to be. And now we really have to look to the future to know we are going to grow at an exponential rate, and how we actually develop and redevelop is so key.
Yeah. Mayor, would you like to comment on the term opportunity or the concept of access to opportunity?
Access, it really is connecting everything. Ogden's in a unique position. You've talked about development versus redevelopment. Ogden's in a redevelopment phase. I mean, we were pretty much built
Old
out.
city that's-
The whole city.
Yeah.
We have no new open space. We were really built out in the 1930s. And we went through a big, probably 4 decades of decline. A little bit of the history on that is the Transcontinental Railroad came through, and 100% of our economy was tied to that. When the freeways and interstates came online and the diesel engine came online, all of that economic vibrancy that we had left in the span of just a handful of short years. So we've really had to work hard and be creative in ways to redevelop. Our downtown for a number of years, we've talked through a couple of these conversations about historic preservation and what you're doing in density in downtowns. 30 years ago, our historic 25th Street, the notorious 25th Street, had 43 buildings on it, 36 of them were vacant. And 3 years ago, it was recognized by the American Planning Association as one of the top 10 streets in the United States of America.
That's a big deal.
It is a
Let's
huge
just
deal.
acknowledge that.
But we've recognized that part of what people want is they want to live in an environment where they don't have to drive everywhere, where they can walk, they can ride their bike, they can access public transportation. UTA started a ski bus a number of years ago, so you buy one of these townhomes downtown, you can take your kids and skis and just walk to the curb. They can pick you up, deliver you to Snow Basin regardless of weather. You can come back down, put them up, and walk a block to one of our eclectic restaurants downtown. That's a real unique quality of life that not a lot of people have in many environments. But you can also be close to your job. If you're not close to your job, public transportation can get you close. We've prioritized making those things accessible for people that want to live in our downtowns. In the last 4 years, we will have, or are now in various states of construction, 1,200 downtown housing units. A decade ago, there wasn't a market for it at all.
That's another big deal.
It's a huge deal, and so we've really
Do you have a
prioritized
downtown
that.
grocery store?
We've got some smaller ones that are kind of eclectic.
That's another thing you check.
We've been working with some bigger ones, and that's,
took Salt Lake City a
certainly
while.
certainly in the long-term master plan, but those have leased up almost twice as fast as the developers expected them to. So people really do want that kind of a product.
That's great. Ted, you have a lot to do with this conference today, and so you would have been one of the people that helped pick the term, access to opportunity. You could have talked about choice, you could have talked about impact, you could have talked about investment, but you chose opportunity. Tell us why.
Well, why do we have cities? We have cities at their very essence, they exist so that we can interact, we can exchange goods, we can socialize. And those are opportunities. So they're not just economic opportunities, they're not even just social opportunities, it might be recreation, but they're things that mean something to us. Maybe we should have, maybe we should have convened a Cracker Jack team of marketing experts and we would have come up with some other options. But I think that word opportunity is so key because it speaks to all of us. It's up to us, right, that the opportunities that we take advantage of, but does the city that we live in give us the ability to pick from a lot of different jobs, to get to a good place to learn without spending a ton of time to get there? There are stories from other parts of the country where lower income residents, to get to their job, they have to take a bus for 90 minutes with 3 transfers. And that's limiting their opportunity. So it gets back to this very notion of a great vision and thinking about how we work together, transportation planning, our local development decisions, linking them so that we can create the kind of city that Reed Ewing talked about, where we really have a ton of different opportunities that people can get to so that they can create the life that they want to create. Take advantage of those opportunities.
Yeah, very good. Okay, I have 3 more questions. We're going to do them rapid fire. I've got one for each of you. But I wanted to just let the audience know that we're going to take your questions, and you see this microphone here, and so you can count down. There's going to be 3 here, and then you can line up here, and we'll take the last 15 minutes just hearing responses to your questions. Does that sound okay? So think of your question. Okay, let's start. Abby, let's start with you. Affordable housing. It was mentioned in Andrew's comments about, housing choice and availability, and I want to hear your thoughts on affordable housing, the need and how we might address it. And again, this is rapid fire.
So one thing I want to dispel is the definition of affordable housing versus housing affordability. And so if you don't mind, can I talk about
Let's do
housing
it.
affordability?
I think there's time for that.
And so that's, we're not talking about low-income housing here. And this, quite frankly, is probably the biggest economic threat we have that not many of us are talking about. And we have to work together to know that growth is coming, but you can't say, but not in my backyard. It is happening, and we all need to create these communities where we can have the options for people to live. Because I want my kids to live here. I want my grandkids to be able to afford to live here. Right now, and Andrew talked about this, in the next 10 to 15 years, we're projecting, and this is data coming out of the Kempsey Gardner Institute, that the average price of the home in the Wasatch Front will be $800,000. Think about that for a minute. That's crazy. We've got to get our arms wrapped around this. We've got to figure out, and there's 3 really components. There's land, the labor market for construction, and then there's also local land use policies that we've got to address.
And we know we have supply constraints on labor. We have a labor shortage. We know we have supply constraints on land. And so we really need help from local government, which is where I want to go with the mayor here. We're going to stay on this issue.
No pressure.
But I couldn't help, let's just call a spade a spade. Local government has land use planning authority, but if you don't take care of the affordable housing issue, make no mistake about it, state government, the Utah legislature will come down on you. What are you hearing at the local government level? Will local government be responsive for the need to not just, land use plan away the opportunities for higher density?
I think they're going to have to. I had the privilege of serving with a number of people in here on the Transportation Task Force over the summer. And this was a big part of that conversation, access to opportunity, and are we being responsible about the next 10 to 20 years of growth? I've heard the speakers talking about penalizing communities that don't provide enough or put an emphasis on low-income housing. They're going to start to tax the communities that say, no, we just want our half-acre lot and a 4-car garage, and that's all we want to have. There's a lot of conversation about carrots and sticks, incentives to get people to really welcome that and embrace it, and sticks for those that don't want to engage in these conversations. Incentives in terms of transportation. Do you get an interchange that's close to your downtown so it's easy to get in and out of your downtown? If you don't agree to some of those land uses, then maybe they don't fund that interchange that comes in. I think a lot of these conversations, in my 6 years in this office, it's really just been the last 2 years that these conversations have started to bubble up, and we've seen this sense of urgency, I think, from a lot of the lawmakers and a lot of the planners. So how that evolves, I think, is going to be critical for everybody to be involved in. It is, as Abby said, you used to know exactly where each city was when I grew up in northern Utah, and I shouldn't say this, but we'd go jump our cars over the railroad tracks in Layton or Kaysville or wherever else, and you always knew what it was because it was all cherry orchards and hayfields. And now you don't know whether you're in Layton or Kaysville or Ogden or West Haven or any of those others.
Think of those pictures of Draper that
yeah.
I showed, and how different it
Collectively,
is.
that's all come together, so we can't afford to be competitive in just our own little places anymore, which is why I think some of the work that Wasatch Front's doing is critical in bringing everybody together. We all have our unique sets of problems, but we can't put our head in the sand and pretend this isn't coming. So I think we don't know yet where that affordable housing conversation or potential solution will be. I hadn't heard that stat about the average home in the next 15 years being $800,000. That absolutely is shocking to me.
Data for you really soon.
Yeah, that's unbelievable, and that's something that I think we all need to be very involved in. Or if we don't invest in that conversation now and engage in that conversation, I think that the state legislature may force some of that change to happen. So we can direct it on the local level, or we risk having the state legislature take our ability to direct some of that if we're not willing to engage in it.
Yeah, thank you. I'll just remind the audience that Andrew Gruber showed the one graph at a bar chart with a line on it that showed you the relationship between household creation and housing units being built. And it showed that we have a housing shortage in our state. We're not building enough homes. And so it begs the question, why not?
There's a gap.
Yeah, there's a housing gap, and so more to come on that. We have a study that's coming out in partnership with the Salt Lake Chamber that will give you all the data on that. Ted, we want to go to a question to you on disruptive technologies. I don't know if you knew this one was coming, but autonomous vehicles, there's things out there that are changing the ground beneath our feet. What do you see? How can it be helpful? Is there anything we should be nervous about?
Well, this is a massive issue, and we're not yet, I think, seeing the brunt of the change on this, but it's coming, and the transportation industry is really looking at this and dusting off our crystal ball and asking, well, what does this mean? And so if you think about it, right, you wake up in the morning, and how much further might you be willing to travel if you could do your hair or your makeup, not me, while your car is driving you, right? And so the fear is, well, will that mean there's a lot more travel, that people will drive much, much more? And then there's the other side of the coin, which is, well, hey, maybe people will not as many people will want to own a car because they can easily hail a very inexpensive, let's say Uber, because the prices come down, you're not even paying a driver. You get in, you go to your spot, and you get dropped off, and off you go, and that auto ownership might fall, and then those very people that do that, they might be more likely to walk and bike and take public transportation. So there's two realities, and there's this interesting debate about, well, which is it? And I think it's both. The answer is both of those things will happen, and that's the question for us as communities, community leaders, is how do we embrace and make happen the upside of connected and autonomous vehicles and ride sourcing, where we are welcoming a sharing of those vehicles. We know where this is happening. It's happening in places where there is a mix of uses, where there are real transportation alternatives. This is happening today, that auto use is driving distances are falling, auto ownership is falling, other modal use is growing in those kinds of places. It reinforces the very notion of the Wasatch Choice 2050 vision.
Okay, it's time for your questions, so come on up to the microphone. I'll just remind you that we have local government represented, a business community voice, and the planning community, so it's a great opportunity. Please, sir, just give us your name and go ahead and address your question.
Great, thank you for the opportunity. My name's Mike Hathorn. I wanted to, I guess, throw a comment for the panel to be able to, I guess, speak your opinions to. And the comment is this: I want to go back to affordability, housing affordability. The issue as I see it is one that's based on housing types that are available based on zoning policy, but it's also a function of how those housing types are allowed to mix. Because part of the threat from a not in my backyard perspective is that there's the fear of the higher density products because of, frankly, in my opinion, misnomers about the people that live in those type of housing. For
Like our
example,
kids and our school teachers and our firefighters.
yeah, there's the pressures of public safety and pressure on schools and so on and so forth. Yet there's a slew of evidence to support that when you mix housing types as opposed to concentrating certain housing types, that the results are better both economically, physically, socially, so on and so forth. So I guess where I'm trying to go with this is I'd love to hear the panel's thoughts on that aspect of not just the housing types, because that's one of the ways that we can start to address the affordability issue in terms of having a broader palette of housing types to work with, but also how you put those housing types together so that you're creating these neighborhoods that are a lot more functional and providing the opportunities for mixed use that frankly can't exist because the densities from a policy standpoint are too low.
Mayor, let's jump to you just on the mix of housing. I mean, have you seen the magic of that in Ogden?
We have, and there are studies out there that show, and there are tools, so you can have tax credits that come, low-income tax credits and some other things, if you promise that X percent of that will be 80% of the medium, 50% of the medium. And we've done a lot of, we had, I think in the last handful of years, almost $28 million in our downtown in housing units that were part of that low-income mix. They look at the wages that you're getting, what percent of the county average those are, and then you get some credits to do that. It's a way to get developers incentivized to start to build some of that. When you have a hot housing market like this and you can get really attractive market rates, why would you go back and not get everything you can out of those? So we've worked with our economic development group and the state on making sure we were able to leverage all of those tools that were out there. They could expand that and make it more appealing for private developers. As a city, we don't do the private development. We can put that zoning and land use in place, but then it's incumbent on those private developers to come put their own money into it. So the better it pencils for them, the more likely they're going to be to do that. We haven't seen that. We're in a unique position in Ogden. I mentioned earlier that we had probably 4 decades of very little paddle in an economic water. And so we have a big mix of really low income and extremely low income housing units that unfortunately got turned into rental units and have kind of been run down. Our job is to kind of encourage home ownership there. We're still one of the most affordable places in the country, and we're rebuilding our neighborhoods by encouraging home ownership there. But I think there are tools out there to encourage that mix. But packing poverty on top of poverty is going to keep people, as Andrew mentioned, in intergenerational poverty. Spreading that out and evening that load, there are studies that show that people are much more likely to kind of do what their neighbors are doing and get involved and have access, as I'll put it out there again, to opportunities that they may not have if we just pack all of that low income in just a couple of little pockets along the Wasatch Front. That is almost a guarantee that they will stay in intergenerational poverty.
Ted, you're probably quite familiar with the slew of evidence on this one. What would you like to comment?
Well, I just want to provide an anecdote that this notion of a mix of housing types near each other is important to each of us that really want to stay in the neighborhood that we live in now, even as we downsize, as our life's needs change. Or, and this may not be all of us, those of us that want to have our children live near us. I mean, right? Not everybody. But
You should ask your children. that
right,
question.
but a lot more of us, right? We want to stay in the neighborhood where we know our neighbors, and we don't want to have to move just because there's no opportunity for a different housing unit type in that immediate vicinity. And I've seen this in my own life. It's really, just think about your own life as you.
Yeah, Abby, did you want to say something?
We've got to come to the realization that not everyone wants a single family home on a quarter or half acre lot. The need to have a nice balance and different ranges of balance is really what makes communities so prosper. I mean, there are some communities in the state that do this so well, and I'm sitting next to one of them that have this just beautiful balance of housing choices for people, and it attracts the people to come into their communities. And I think that's really key. I mean, we're going to have so much data and evidence to be able to share here in the next few months, and we're very excited to get out and start to spread that word to local communities about really what the balance, the true secret sauce is on housing.
Yeah, yeah, great. Sir, your question, tell us who you are, who you're with.
Greg Bell, Utah Transit
I'm
Association.
having fun.
Yeah. Some of us for really 20 years have tried to change the sales tax mix. And cities have fought that life and death. And now it's starting, the worm is turning, and you're seeing a lot of vacancies in shopping centers. Kmart is no more. There's a big hole in Farmington, a big hole in Draper. You're going to see more and more of these big boxes go dark. So where is this going to lead us as this e-commerce takes retail? All of a sudden, cities who made the big bets on retail.
Yeah, it's a great question. Who would like to tackle the retail question?
I'll jump in first here.
Okay, get the business voice.
Yeah. Greg, you're absolutely correct. When we created the 50-50 population point of sale, it was a long time ago, and the economy has definitely changed. And it's time that our elected officials look at this on the statewide level to look at the distribution of this, but that's a very tough thing to do. And, yeah.
But
you
by
as
definition, that means there's winners and losers.
There are. And, it's the right thing to do, but it's a really big thing to do. And I think as you see more and more of our percentage of sales go to internet sales and the redevelopment of the old box stores, communities aren't searching for, they shouldn't be searching for the Costcos and the big Walmarts anymore. You really should be looking for, a more commercial type use. And so it'll be an interesting debate moving forward. It's one that has to be had.
Yeah.
And the sooner the later, the better.
Looks like the mayor wants to talk about it. We've got 4 minutes left, so let's go quickly, and then we'll do these two questions. And if
Can I
Ted-
just give one
yeah.
quick, a city like Ogden, we have a daytime population that goes from about 90 to about 125 is our guess. All those people rush into work and get jobs there, but we don't collect a single penny in income tax, but we have to provide all the services for that. So if the state really did want to incentivize a move away from a little bit of sales tax to job creation in local communities, having just a little bit of income tax that came along with that to help pay for those services, a lot of cities would rush to go do that right now. Right now, we don't get anything out of that.
Yeah, that could be a big constitutional change in our state. Ted?
I'll be really brief on this. It's a key point that Greg made, and I'll just ask you that you should take a look at your zoning and see if your retail zoning lets the market do anything different. A lot of retail zoning out there only allows retail, and then you ask yourself, well, how does the development community be flexible and follow a changing tide?
Yeah, very good. Okay, sir, your name and who you're with, and let's do it really quickly here so we can get both these questions answered.
My name's David Wright. I'm a landscape architect in Salt Lake County. And the interest that I have, we've talked about the big money, the big ticket items. You're talking about a building, a normal building might cost $100 a square foot to build, whereas developing a landscape, maybe $5, $6 a square foot. My question is with regards to those natural areas. We've talked about it generally, but what are we doing from a meaningful perspective to address the humanity that's brought to us from landscapes, from environments? How are we really addressing that going forward? Because if we don't, it's always going to be on the back burner because it doesn't have that high value, that high money value that so many of these other things that we've been talking about today.
Wonderful question. Who wants to tackle that one briefly? Looks like Ted.
Do you want to?
You can go.
Well, the access to nature, that opportunity, if you will, it's really Utah's calling card, right? It's what sets us apart from just about every place in the country. And are we paying attention to that in more than just our ability to get to the mountains? Are we bringing nature within our communities? So I think it's a critical question, and Andrew identified it as one of the 4 key strategies of Wasatch Choice 2050. I think there's a bunch of things that we can do, but I think a really good place to start is, do you have a plan in your city for the holding open land, not just smaller parks, but holding open land, working with your neighboring communities, thinking about corridors that make sense. Maybe it's along creeks or foothills or what have you. Start with a plan, and then move into and think about how your ordinances can implement it. We might need to ask ourselves, do we need some money at a higher level of government to help us buy some land?
A lot of communities have bonded for critical open space, knowing that they've got to go, it's in private hands now, they've got to find a way to secure that. Communities have bonded for that, done education programs, and found funding to go pick some of those up. I know almost every mayor I talk to along the Wasatch Front, that's a big concern of theirs, and they're working on solutions for that. And one of the things I'll say really quick that hasn't been talked about, that has got to be mentioned, when we look at the extra 3 million people we're going to have here, what are we going to do to water that many people and the increase in businesses and economics? You cannot continue to have those big open spaces with you know, your half-acre lot and a 4-car garage and a huge lawn. As that population comes online, one of the things that gets us all nervous, we have communities in Weber County and in some others that can do zero development right now because they've run out of water shares. So that's something we collectively need to address, and having this mix of housing and downtown housing does help. Your water footprint is much, much leaner when we look at that. So that's 30 years, that's something that we're going to very seriously need to address.
Abby, if you're okay, we'll go to this last question, except I have one last one for him, but go ahead, sir. Tell us who you're with and your name.
My name is Dave Eltis. I'm editor-publisher for Cycling Utah magazine. So if you look at European cities like Vienna, Copenhagen, Berlin, the density in the downtown area is, 6-story buildings everywhere. You have bikes and pedestrians everywhere. You have transit everywhere. You don't have that in Salt Lake City. You don't have that pretty much anywhere in Utah. And then in Utah, though, you have issues where councils and mayors rebel against that sort of thing. They rebel against taller buildings, like say in Sugar House. They rebel against taller buildings in downtown Salt Lake.
Cottonwood Mall.
Cottonwood Mall. Although that has a great view, but 21st South, for example, bike lanes, were rejected by our mayor here in Salt Lake City, to push forward cars. How do you educate both elected officials, entities like UDOT, who are also constantly making decisions for cars as opposed to alternative transportation, and the public? How do you educate those entities, get them all on the same page to deal with the changing landscape of growth in regards to density and transportation alternatives?
Very good. Okay, so one of the key strategies is transportation choices. This gentleman points to both a density and a transportation choice. Quick commentary from anyone?
I would just say there's no better time than what's happening right now on the choices conversation. We'll have a bill this session that really addresses active transportation, transit, and roads, and how we actually fund all of them and make it available for communities and the state to fund all of them, which is something we've never done. We don't have the ability to open up state funds to all different sources. So communities are doing great with trail networks. Prop 1 was a shining example in the two counties that passed it in the Wasatch Front of the availability to be able to be flexible with those funds. So the tide is shifting. It's not going to happen overnight, but it definitely is taking shape. And you should know, as local communities, and I know you do, I'm not telling you anything you don't know, that those options are what people want. They want to be able to have those choices.
Briefly, anyone else you want to add something?
I'll be brief. First of all, UDOT is one of the, sorry Dave, UDOT's one of the shining stars nationally in doing great things with active transportation. And one of the things that UDOT does rightfully is they look to the local government and they say, what are your priorities? What do you want to do? What is your active transportation plan? And so to the extent that we are all looking appropriately at local decision-making, that's a question for you to ask yourselves.
Great. Okay.
Could I jump in on
You
that really
may.
quick? Dave, I appreciate the question, and how people get involved is doing exactly what you're doing. You show up at active transportation meetings, you get your voice out there, you tell people that grew up here and were just used to being in the car all the time, that haven't had exposure to it, you get that in front of them. That's part of the reason I rode my bike to work every single calendar day in 2014 to say, this matters. You can do it, and we can figure some things out, and I can go back to UDOT and say, when I was riding my bike, I saw this and this and this, and we need to put some policy in place to make some changes there. So being involved is how that happens. I don't think when you look at the makeup of councils and a lot of the mayors that are along the Wasatch Front that grew up there, spent their whole life there, some of the times they don't have that perspective. It's incumbent on all of us to provide our experience and our perspectives to get them to shift their thinking a little bit. So I applaud you for your heavy involvement in that.
Very good. We will wrap this up by asking each of our panelists to summarize the one factor that they think will have the greatest impact on helping us to thrive as a region. And we'll give the mayor the last word. So we'll start with you, Ted. One factor that you think will help us thrive over the long term. And when I say one factor, it's like a word or a sentence.
Where you
This was not the
put
script.
things that have regional significance, jobs, lower priced housing, educational facilities, where you put them matters a lot. Think about creating centers and tying them with infrastructure opportunities.
Where we grow matters. Abby? One factor. What do you think?
Don't be afraid to make the tough decisions that are hard today that affect your future. Don't handcuff the future generation.
When I showed those pictures, there was a lot of examples of tough decisions that were made, and we're the beneficiaries of it. You get the last word, Mayor.
I would say collaboration and commitment. It's critical that we collaborate and figure this out. There are a couple of spines that connect all of us, and we've all got to be a participant in those conversations, and then commitment to taking the long view on this. I said earlier, one of my favorite quotes is from Wayne Gretzky. Greatness isn't skating to where the puck is, it's skating to where it's going to be. And we have a pretty good sense of where we're going to be along the Wasatch Front, and we've got to be building to that, not to where we are today.
Let's give our panelists a hand.
Thank you.
We thank our panelists today. We're now ready to go down to the second floor, room 255, for our luncheon and to hear from our keynote speakers. We'd encourage you to use either the escalators or the stairs since the elevator has limited capacity.
This Wasatch Choice 2050 is an impressive plan by my judgment. I want to hear you comment on two things. How does it compare to what you've seen in other areas? And then, sorry to double up on you, but Andrew mentioned these key strategies, and the fourth one was this link between development and transportation decisions. And I'd love to hear your comments on why that's so important.
Okay, well, the first question was, how does this stack up with some efforts around the country? And